Unicorn Resting in the Garden, 1495 to 1505, France, Netherlands. The 7 individual draperies, known as unicorn tapestries, are among the most beautiful and elaborate surviving works of late medieval art. Lavishly woven from fine wool and silk with silver and gilded threads, the tapestries vividly depict scenes associated with the hunt for the elusive, magical unicorn. The unicorn in captivity may have been created as a separate image rather than as part of a series. In this case, the unicorn probably represents a tame lover. It is tied to a tree and bounded by a fence, but the chain is unreliable and the fence is low enough to jump over it. The unicorn could run away if he wanted to. The ripe, seed-filled pomegranates on the tree are a medieval symbol of fertility and marriage. The red spots on its side do not appear to be blood, since there are no visible wounds, as in hunting shows. Rather, they represent the sap dripping from the burst pomegranates on top. Many other plants shown here, such as the wild orchid, bistort, and thistle, echo this theme of marriage and procreation. They were known in the Middle Ages as fertility aids for both men and women. Even the little frog, nestled among the violets in the lower right corner, was mentioned by medieval authors because of its noisy mating. Another story tells us of a unicorn purifying water. In this tapestry, the unicorn kneels before a tall white fountain, on the edge of which sit a pair of peasants and a pair of twitterlings. Other animals, both exotic and native to Europe, loiter while 12 hunters at the back of the stage discuss the discovery of their prey. Flora and fauna play an important role in the narrative of the unicorn tapestry. Plants prescribed in medieval herbal gatherings as antidotes, such as sage, marigolds, and orange, are located near a stream that is purged by magical unicorn horn. Tapestry served as decorations and an expensive treat. And why not satisfy the human aesthetic by decorating the castle with beautiful work? Tapestry with coats of arms and badges of John, Lord Denham, c. 1488 to 1501, Netherlands. John, Lord Denham, was naval officer under 5 kings and treasurer of England from 1486 to 1501. The inscription around the garter is the motto of the Order of the Garter, to which Lord Denham was appointed in 1487. The tapestry was probably woven to commemorate this event. The supporters, in the form of stags, or reindeer, referred to Lord Denham's ancestral estate, Heartland. The recurring design of the upper castle of the warship with darts leaning against the railings and swallow-tailed pennants fluttering above them refers to Lord Denham's distinguished naval career. But the walls were decorated not only with tapestries but frescoes. One of the elements of church decoration were stained glass windows. Stained art, which originated around the 6th century AD, reached its peak in the Gothic period in architecture and interiors. During this period, stained glass windows became the main decorative element in cathedrals, churches, and rich mansions. Stained glass windows in the design of early Christian temples were used even before the 12th century. First, they were colored mica inserts, and with the invention of manufacturing technology of sheet glass, temple windows began to decorate stained glass. But they played a secondary role. The main decor in those days were wall and ceiling frescoes. Windows in ancient temples were small, narrow, and had almost no functional load. Gothic direction in the construction of churches and houses was very different from previous technologies because the buildings were built on a frame basis. It allowed to increase considerably both the size of constructions and the area of glazing. Windows began to replace frescoes and became the main decorative element. Upon entering a Gothic cathedral, a parishioner finds himself in a stream of colored light, from which it is difficult to distinguish individual subjects. In order to read a stained glass window correctly, one must find the beginning and the end of the story, as well as understand how the geometric figures into which it is broken up logically relate. A stained glass window is a multi-layer puzzle. Characters and backgrounds are assembled from pieces of colored glass held together by lead rims. Individual scenes are often enclosed in geometric shapes, large and small squares, circles, four-leafers, stars, and so on, which separate more important episodes from less important ones, and the main plots from their commentaries. The sequence of scenes here is not structured like cycles of miniatures in manuscripts or a succession of episodes in frescoes. Stained glass has different rules for reading: biblical themes and hagiographies of saints, historical events and the terrible judgment, another Bible for the poor. At first, stained glass windows mostly adorned monastic churches. Later, the largest windows were made for city cathedrals. The cathedral, the main temple of the diocese and the residence of its bishop, was most often the largest building in the city and embodied not only the power of the church, but also the wealth of local residents who could erect it, preferably outshining their neighbors. And the attribute of the cathedral was the rose, a huge round window symmetrically diverging from the center petals of various designs, one of the visiting cards of Gothic. From the outside, you can see the intricate stone weaving. Inside, in the semi-darkness of the temple, the edges of the petals are not so visible, but the stained glass windows built into the sections of the huge wheel shine. But cathedrals were not the only ones decorated with stained glass. Rottendell, 1390 Austrian. The castle at Ebrechtesdorf, strategically located south of Vienna near the Hungarian border, served as a private residence for the member of the court. These windows from the glazing of the castle chapel were made by a large workshop in the service of the royal dukes in Vienna. Elongated figures with heads, often found in profile, heavy masses of drapery, and an unusually rich color scheme distinguish the style of this court workshop. This window displays scenes of Christ's infancy, including the Annunciation to the Virgin Mary, the presentation of Christ in the temple, and the adoration of the Magi with the Virgin Mary dressed in royal purple, but resting on a straw mat. The open-work light above, representing the sun and moon, is also from Ebrechtesdorf. Having withstood Mongol attacks in the 13th century and sacked by the Turks in 1683, Ebrechtesdorf never returned to its medieval splendor, except for one panel in Vienna. The windows in the museum's collection are all that remains of Ebrechtesdorf's glass. Another stained glass window with a civic theme, heraldic panel with the coat of arms of the House of Habsburg, c. 1504 to 156. The Gravenstein, Count's Castle, in Ghent, was the main possession of the Habsburg in southern Flanders. This stained glass window, believed to have come from this imperial residence, is a part of a larger series commissioned by either Maximilian I or Charles V. In the 13th century, rich red and deep blue colors dominated French stained glass windows. France, the birthplace of the Gothic, had long set the architectural taste in much of Europe. In the middle of the same century, colorless glass began to come into vogue, with designs executed in gradations of gray, grisaille. From the beginning of the 14th century, craftsmen learned to give individual fragments of transparent glass, such as the halos of saints or the crowns of monarchs, a yellow color, so that in the late Middle Ages, many stained glass windows were in a white-gray-yellow color scheme. Grisaille panel, 1270 to 80, French. The artistry of this window stems from the contrast between the silvery effect of the grisaille decoration and the gradient colors of the ledges and borders. In addition, the graceful juxtaposition of straps on spiraling vines with stylized leaves is enhanced by the bold outlines of the shapes and the dense shading of the background. The windows of the choir chapel at Secca originally consisted of ribbon windows, with colored figured glass in the central areas and grisaille panels above and below. The upper and lower panels are modern. Over time, colored glass with stories became available, and simple parish churches and in the later Middle Ages, small stained glass medallions on religious and secular subjects appeared on the windows of town halls and even mansions of wealthy burghers. The variety of subjects increased. Biblical subjects began to alternate with genre scenes and floral ornamentation. We meet these windows on the canvases of European artists. The Bible in the form of visual agitation, using stained glass and frescoes, did not cancel the role of books in Christian worship and brought to life another type of painting, book illustration, book miniatures. The appearance of illustration was facilitated by the emergence of the stapled codex. The main customer for richly illustrated liturgical books was the church. The book is adorned with images of the evangelists, illustrations from the Gospels, and gold and silver letters on a purple background that adds to its splendor. In time, the book becomes an attribute of secular life. Before us is the Apocalypse, c. 1330, France. The Apocalypse, or Book of Revelation, according to European medieval tradition, was written by John the theologian during his exile on the Greek island of Patmos. The first chapters tell of God's instructions to the bishops of the 7 churches in Asia Minor. The following chapters describe John's unusual account of the events that will take place at the end of time. The colorful illustrations in this manuscript bring these fantastic prophecies to life. The partially erased coat of arms in the book suggests that it was created for an aristocratic couple in Normandy. An even more interesting book is the Book of Hours of Joan of Iveros, Queen of France, c. 1324-28. At first glance, this tiny prayer book without a single trace of gold might seem an unlikely acquisition for a Queen of France. But it is a work of exceptional skill. The figures are rendered in fine grisaille, shades of gray, which gives them a remarkable sculptural quality, and are accented with rich color and touches of lilac and turquoise. The 209 folios include 25 full-page paintings, with paired images from the infancy and passion of Christ, and scenes from the life of St. Louis, the Queen's ancestor. Some 700 illustrations in the margins depict the bishops, beggars, street dancers, girls, and musicians who populated the streets of medieval Paris, as well as monkeys, rabbits, dogs, and creatures of pure fantasy. Jeanne d'Aruxis' will identifies this prayer book, left to King Charles V, as the only one. And the most unique in the museum's collection is undoubtedly the Belles-Heures of Jean de France, Duc de Berry, 1405 to 1408 or 1409. The Limburg Brothers, created between 1405 and 1408 or 1409, probably in Paris. The private religious book, Belles-Heures, or Beautiful Hours, is one of the most magnificent manuscripts to have survived from the Middle Ages. Commissioned by Jean de France, the Duc de Berry, and produced by the Limburg brothers, the most gifted artists of their day, it is the only manuscript which they produced in its entirety. The richly illustrated text is complemented by 7 unprecedented cycles of paintings, dedicated to Christian figures or events of particular significance to the Duke. Using a luminous palette, the artist blended an intimate northern vision of nature with Italian ways of figurative articulation. The lively interest in the natural world and the naturalistic means of depicting it, so striking in 172 illuminations. And if everyone knows about the books, there are things in the museum, the meaning of which at first glance remains incomprehensible. Aquamaniles are shaped vessels used to pour water on people's hands. Hence, incidentally, their name aqua, water, manis, hand. It is clear that they did not pour water on the hands of the first person they met, but of the representatives of the nobility when they sat down at the dinner table. That is, those knights of the Middle Ages were not so dirty. In any case, they washed their hands before eating, though without soap and perhaps not so thoroughly. In addition, aquaniles were also used by clergymen, who also had their hands poured out of them before Mass aquanimil in the form of a dragon, c. 1200. North German aquaniles made in the form of animals, are among the most original products of medieval craftsmen. The most common zoomorphic aquanimals are lions, but dragons, griffins, and many other forms were also created. This striking vessel represents a dragon that rests on its legs at the front and the tips of its wings at the back, with its tail twisted into a handle. It was filled through a hole in the tail, now without the hinged lid. Water poured out through a spout formed by a hooded figure sandwiched between the dragon's teeth. In addition to its visible power, this aquanimal is notable for its fine casting, evident in the carefully minted dragon scales and other superficial details. Another example of zoomorphic aquanimal in the form of a lion, ca. 1400, Germany. Broad-breasted, protruding mane and open mouth, the lion is shamelessly proud and wary. To create this exceptional king of beasts, the artist first made a cruel clay model and then molded it in wax. He then covered the wax with a mixture of brick, clay, and ash before melting the wax to form a space that could be filled with molten metal. Aquanimals were usually cast in copper alloy and were produced in large quantities in Europe between the 12th and 15th centuries. It is interesting that they reached the peak of their popularity in the 13th century, and they were always on all the tables of the nobility and the clergy. And of course, we can't leave out the church utensils and the jewelry. And let us begin, of course, with the cross, a work of art from the 13th century made in Italy. It is unique not only for the delicate work done in silver ligature, but for the mystical animals on the crossbars. Another exhibit is Chalice, c. 1230-50, German. This bowl is part of an ensemble containing some of the elements necessary for the Eucharist, a discuss for the bread, a cup for the wine, and as an exception, a straw for sipping, wine. In the decoration of this cup, scenes from the life of Christ are juxtaposed with the events of the Old Testament, which were considered a prototype of the New Testament. 12 apostles surrounded the bowl. The depiction of Saint Trudpert on the discuss indicates that the ensemble was made for a monastery dedicated to him near Freiburg in Breisburg, where he was martyred. We are intimately acquainted with the art of the reliquaries at the Metropolitan, but there are unique pieces at Cloisters as well. The reliquary, c. 1325-1350. This sumptuous reliquary places the Virgin and Child, accompanied by angels, in an elaborate architectural shrine. The arches, vaults, and sculptural decorations are of gilded silver. The translucent enamel panels on the casements, depicting scenes from the life of the Virgin and the infancy of Christ, resemble stained glass windows. This example, one of 4 surviving similar shrines, is recorded in the 18th century inventories of the Convent of Poor Clares of the Order of St. Francis in Buda, part of the modern city of Budapest, founded by Queen Elizabeth, Hungary in 1334. It is a rare case in the Middle Ages when we know the author of a work. Covered goblet, c. 1470. Hans Grief Hermann. This magnificent silver goblet from the medieval town hall of Ingolstadt in Bavaria is a striking testimony to the prosperity of the city and its inhabitants, above all the members of the town council. The town hall boasted a treasury full of silver. The members of the town council and the guild leaders who gathered at the meetings seemed to take the organization of the celebration seriously. Based on this example, the kneeling knights hold the painted coat of arms of Ingolstadt Mayor Hans Gletzel, in whose honor it was given to the city treasury. But did Gletzel himself pay for this ostentatious silver goblet? The weapon found on the inside of the lid may have belonged to the Bakers' Guild, but has also been interpreted as a weapon of barbers or bathsmen. And another goblet by the same author. Tiny bunches of grapes made of green and red glass beads peek out from the tendrils of the vine at the base, quietly proclaiming that it is a vessel for wine. Hairy savages supporting the base hint at a party atmosphere. The hunt scene engraved on the exterior depicting a unicorn is not original. But not only German craftsmen were skilled jewelers. A covered cup from Spain, late 15th century. The rare open-work lid of this Spanish cup, with intricate ornamentation borrowed from late Gothic architecture, almost surpasses the shape of the vessel itself. On the outside of the bowl, the Latin text, Hail Mary, is engraved in Gothic letters. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus, tecum. The Archangel Gabriel's greeting to the Virgin Mary when he announced the impending birth of Jesus. The 6 facets of the handle and lid are decorated with lancet arches, beneath which are busts of Christ, the Virgin and Child, and the saints. On the lobes of the foot are images of the crucifixion, the instruments of the Passion, the Virgin and Child, and the Tribulation. Both the base and the lid have a branding used by Toledo jewelers in the 15th century. We finished our journey through medieval Europe at the Cloisters Museum. Returning to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, we will revisit what we have learned many times. And next time, we will meet you at the European Art Museum.